members of the Rainbow Push Coalition. I'm Cecilia Gordon, Vice President of Distribution at the STARS Network, a subsidiary of Lionsgate. STARS is proud to be a sponsor for this year's annual Rainbow Push Convention. We realize that ensuring the representation of diverse voices on our network matters. STARS recently launched its hashtag Take the Lead initiative, the company's comprehensive effort to deepen its existing commitment to narratives by, about, and for women and underrepresented audiences. As a part of Take the Lead, the network commissioned an inclusion study in partnership with the Center for Scholars and Storytellers at UCLA, confirming our diverse representation on screen, off screen, and throughout our executive ranks of women and people of color. Whether it is the Power Universe, P-Valley, Run the World, Blind Spotting, an upcoming series, Black Mafia Family, and more, STARS leads the industry with 63.2% series leads who are people of color. Our multifaceted approaches to improving representation serves as our guiding principle across our business and from programming choices to hiring decisions. Reverend Jackson, good luck on a wonderful convention. We are excited to support the coalition's endeavors this year. Thank you.
We've had a powerful health session. We thank all of the participants in that. And now the rest of the day, you have two powerful sessions. We want you to understand what it means to have access to telecommunications. What does it mean to say broadband only available to some? What are we doing about this broadband challenge? You've witnessed it during this season of COVID because your children needed Wi-Fi in order to access instruction. So we're going to have some great information prepared for us by our DC satellite office, our Telecom project. You don't want to miss this session.
Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you are joining us here at the Rainbow Push Coalition's annual convention. I'm Dr. Turner Lee. I'm Senior Fellow of in Governance Studies, as well as the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution. And I'm also the Chairwoman of the Public Policy Institute in the Washington, D.C. area for Rainbow Push, as well as a board member. And I couldn't be more delighted to have this conversation as part of this convention because we all know that this pandemic has changed not only the way we live, we learn, we earn, even love, but it's also had an effect on people of color, particularly Black people, when it comes to their ability to engage just general things like learning or working or meeting with their doctor, and especially connecting with loved ones within their community. And so the conversation becomes not just about how we're going to close the digital divide, my friends, but the people that we are talking about, they're folks that were on the other side of opportunity in many cases, people that look like us. That it's not just about them not having access to the internet or computer, but it's also about the ability to have the opportunities that are rightfully ours. As my friend Angela Rye would say, we built this country for free and we want what we deserve. And I just have to say this before I go to these three lovely ladies, that I have a book coming out at the end of the year on the U.S. digital divide. It is entitled Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. And I hope that Reverend Jackson will have me back to do a book talk, hopefully in person in Chicago. And so this conversation that we're going to have today is one, I think, of incredible importance to the coalition, but it's even more important for us to get this right, particularly as this country transitions from pandemic response stage to one where we're actually going back to business. And I'm joined today by three wonderfully smart, beautiful Black women, leaders, who are actually working in this space. Dr. Dominique Harrison is a director at my former place of employment, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, running their broadband portfolio. Dr. Fallon Wilson is actually a VP at the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, a place that I also worked at. And Dr. Kathy Trimble, yes, three doctors, is the former principal and educator at the Francis Marion School in Marion, Alabama, the birthplace of Coretta Scott King, and a person who I had the pleasure of actually meeting with and visiting as part of the data collection on my book. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for engaging this conversation. I know Reverend is looking with eyes wide open to see what we're going to talk about. So let's jump right into this. And Dr. Harrison, I'll talk to you. First and foremost, tell us about your role at the Joint Center. But more importantly, let's talk about why the digital divide is so important to close, particularly when we think about all of the other inequalities that are out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So happy to be on this panel with great panelists. So the Joint Center for Political and Economic Study, or otherwise known as the Joint Center, is known as America's Black think tank. We provide compelling and actionable policy solutions to eradicate persistent and evolving barriers to the full freedom of Black people in America. And now the tech policy program that I run is dedicated to exploring the impact of emerging technologies and developing policy solutions to improve the lives of Black communities. We're focused on 3 issue areas: platform accountability, which encompasses like misinformation, disinformation, voter suppression ads. We're focused on privacy and algorithmic fairness. So that's personal information that results in discrimination for people of color. And lastly, we're focused on broadband access and adoption, which I'm so excited to talk about today. So through our research and policy recommendations, our vision is to ensure that Black communities are not harmed by and have the opportunity to benefit from technologies. And to answer your second question, closing the digital divide is important for Black and Brown communities because broadband is essential to education, job growth, economic prosperity, healthcare services, and civic engagement. Black Americans need policy changes to address racial disparities, digital inequality, and broadband connectivity. Further, there is a need for new and inclusive federal solutions that both make high-speed broadband affordable and lead to the build-out of high-speed, quality broadband infrastructure for Black and Brown communities in both urban and metropolitan areas. And I'm so excited to talk more about those issues today.
We're going to come back to that as well, Dominique. So thank you for actually laying that out. Dr. Wilson, I want to talk to you because you have become what I'm going to say very nicely, the church broadband lady. I've had the opportunity to do a few panels. I actually had to say it. We're having fun here.
I am the church whisperer for this important issue. I believe that it's essential that churches and other faith-based institutions be considered, in my opinion, tech anchor institutions for connectivity within municipalities, in the ways that we think about libraries, in the ways that we think about hospitals, in the ways that we think about schools. There's no reason why faith institutions shouldn't be that. Why? Because they are connecting and helping all types of social-based services, and of course their own types of messaging as it relates to their faith traditions to get people connected. And I think it's an overlooked notion. Matter of fact, I was having a conversation with a colleague this morning because we're working to, like, once again, mobilize African-American churches for this push for a permanent broadband subsidy, a long-term solution. And I said, people overlook the church every time, but let's be very clear about how it has been an economic and a social connector, motivator, and a cornerstone for Black people in this country. Primarily, where did our credit unions come from? Black churches. Where did our HBCUs come from? Black churches. Where did our Black women's club movements come from? Black churches. Why? Because we didn't have access to other places because of white supremacy. And so you can call me the Black church broadband lady if you like, which I think is hilarious. But it really talks to what's going on in this moment. And I know your question, because I cut you off, so when I read the questions, the emergency broadband benefit, it took the pandemic for others outside of this amazing group of Black women who are on this panel to see that, oh my gosh, the digital divide still exists. Oh my gosh. Well, we have known it's been around for at least 20, 30 years, but I'm glad you get it now. So Congress said, let's solve an issue. Let's give an emergency funding so that people who don't have internet access can get a $50 subsidy that they can apply to their current bill or to get connected. And let's give $100 up to some type of device, a tablet or laptop. Amazing, right? It gives the opportunity to level some of the playing field, but it's temporary, right? It's temporary either because the money's going to run out before, right? the emergency period ends, or Congress says, the pandemic is over, like some folks in the South are saying, and then the money will end also. And so we at MMTC, the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, has been around for 35 years. It doesn't get the same level of shine and press in the ways that many of our historic civil rights organizations do, but they have been around advocating within the telecommunication multicultural space for a very long time to ensure that people of color, not just Black people, have access to this world of technology and innovation. And so they brought me on, and I want to make policy actionable. And so we're mobilizing African-American churches, number one, to enroll their parishioners and community members into the emergency broadband benefit, but also to mobilize for a permanent solution.
Yes. And Fallon, just before I leave you, and I say that with actually most respect, because I've had the opportunity to sit on panels that you've actually hosted on your initiative. Can you just share with the audience, like, who is actually showing up in terms of these conversations from the church community?
We have drafted a letter to Vice President Kamala Harris about the need for a permanent solution, written by some of our coalition leaders in the Black Churches for Broadband group. And so who's showing up? Black women are showing up. Black womanists are showing up. Black women preachers are showing up in a way that I'm like, come on, brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no offense to the Honorable, who is the creator of Push, but come on, brothers. It is amazing. Yet again, Black women are pushing the need for us to mobilize our churches. They are the ones that are attending our panels, our leadership trainings on Zoom for the EBB. They're the ones emailing me every day. I get a lot of emails daily now, which is great, from Black church female leaders across the country saying, how can we plug in? How can we be a part of your week of action next week? And what do we need to do? Do you have a Womanist Wednesday? I said, I do. Should I add your name? Okay. I may not have, that many Zoom rooms, but I think Black women are showing up in this moment. And it's the scholars, but it's also the preachers, and it's also the church mothers who are on their flip phones and are like, Fallon, I want to be connected. I know Black church nurses. How can we get connected? I'm in the rural South in South Carolina. It is an interesting experiment. I'm going to collect some data so that Dominique and I can write a paper together about this.
Yes, and I think that's important to say. And just for people, again, who know the church community, the church has always showed up on instances like this. And I think what MMTC is trying to do with their initiative and the Rainbow Push Coalition, Bishop Smith, who runs the DC program, was actually on the last call trying to figure out the role that the RPC plays. But that Reverend Dr. Renita Weems, there's just people that we all know that have been respected in the community, particularly among Black female clergy, that I think is so important. Thank you for sharing. I had to put that plug out there. And it is an endearing statement, because by years and decades of doing this, it's also good to see faith-based organizations at the table. Dr. Trimble, now I had this interesting experience. We are tied at the hip. I would say that we are almost like second cousins. I drove down to Marion, Alabama to visit the Francis Marion Consolidated School, K through 12. I wrote about it in a story. And when I went down there, I met this wonderful woman that's going to speak next, who really understands not only why her kids needed broadband, because she was one of the beneficiaries of the Connect Ed program that Obama had, where every student in her school had an iPad, but she also understood the reason why we need to do that to break the trajectories that many of our kids in the rural South, the Black rural South, actually experience. So I want to turn it over to you, because I know it's been interesting pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in terms of why having a connection really matters.
First of all, I want to say again, thank you for allowing me to serve on this panel. To what Dr. Wilson just said, she was saying that there are some people that were still surprised about the digital divide. Unfortunately, there were some people who did not even know that it existed. So here we are in rural Alabama. That's just our reality. As Dr. Lee just said, we're a comprehensive K-12 school that's located in Marion, a very rural area, and a large number of our students are located in the rural part of the county. So when the pandemic hit in March 2020, we, like everyone else, was taken by surprise. But fortunately, from a technological aspect, prior to the pandemic, we were flying really, really high. We had received the Apple Connected grant during that Obama administration. So all of our students had iPads. All of our teachers had MacBooks. The infrastructure for a wireless connection at the school was top of the line. AT&T had partnered with us to make sure that our children had connectivity. We had all of the bells and whistles. We were, I mean, probably even more than some of the affluent areas did. So as I said before, we were riding pretty high. But then when the pandemic hit, then that's when we were, and not only that, we were off the Connect Ed grant. The AT&T partnership was no longer there. So when our children were forced to go home, they had devices, but they had no connectivity. So it was like they had a luxury car sitting up in their garage and no gas to go in it. It was just a good showpiece. So this showed it showed our students that the digital divide was real. Not only our students, but it showed the entire world that the digital divide is real. And it really became evident, and it showed up at that point in time. So here we are, these children having these devices, they were cut off from the real world, not just academically, but in every sense of the world, in every sense of the word. That's when the ugly truth regarding the digital divide became evident. So as we approach the after, if I can even say there is an after, I'm like you, here we are down in the South. Many times as I go out, I'm the only someone that's wearing a mask with brothers. You better believe I'm gonna wear my mask because it is still real. So if we talk about the after, and I can't even say that there is an after, the challenge, however, still persists because at our school, we had hotspots from AT&T. AT&T had a program called the Alabama Broadband Connectivity Program that provided hotspots for all of our students. Well, that was fantastic. They worked extremely well for our students, even in the most remote areas of the county. However, that was just like placing a Band-Aid on a large gash. It was a temporary solution for a permanent problem because at the end of June, on June 30th, those hotspots were turned off. And so when they were turned off, now here we are back to square one. So as school gets ready to open up in the fall, here we are asking the same question we were asking almost 2 years ago. Now what do we do? What's going to happen to our babies? What's going to happen to our students? How are they going to get access to connectivity now? So, like, as I said, it is time out for us dealing with these Band-Aids for these large problems.
I love what you're talking about, and just acknowledging the work that AT&T has done, other companies, to really make sure that they actually filled in the gap. Part of it goes back to what Fallon was talking about with the emergency broadband benefit, folks. I mean, a lot of these things that we saw were pandemic responses. How do we get 50 million school-aged children, 9 million of them without either broadband at home or a device, what they need? And out came the emergency broadband benefit, which at this point, has reached millions of people, but it's still temporary. We need to make it permanent. We need to hear Dr. Trimble. And I have a piece coming out next week, given the fact that we're seeing increases in the variant among school-aged children. How do we continue to make this a policy priority that no child should ever be left offline, regardless of where they are in the country? And I think that's an imperative that we need to make around this. I want to kind of break this next question. This is all, I'll go to you first, Dominique, and then I'll go back to you, Fallon, and we'll bring back in Dr. Trimble. When we think about the rural South, I mean, I know I'm working on a project right now. Dominique, I know you just put out a report. Dr. Trimble is the rural South, right? In terms of the people that live in the South. It's not necessarily the Trump people. It's not necessarily the farmers. There are Black farmers or Latina farmers or tribal farmers. How do we begin to look at just how important it is to actually connect rural, Dominique, given the fact that there's going to be a lot of money potentially in the infrastructure bill when it comes to rural broadband deployment?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Dr. Turley. I mean, for us, broadband is important for Black communities, like I said, across the nation. So we recently released an issue brief on expanding broadband in the Black rural South that includes key findings from our forthcoming report to be released at the end of this month. Our audience can find it on jointcenter.org. And so we conducted this research because too often national broadband conversations focused on rural America conflate rural with white and point to racial disparities in broadband adoption as an affordability challenges facing Black residents of metro areas. The discussions rarely give attention to the unique plight of Black residents of rural counties. So in our report, we examine 152 counties that have populations that are at least 35% African American, spread across 10 states, which include Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. And what we found is that 38% of African Americans in that region do not have access to home internet. And this is a problem driven by both affordability and availability of broadband services. Black households in the Black rural South are much more likely to have lower incomes under $35,000, so they're less likely to have or afford broadband services. And our data reveals that internet service providers have failed to deploy broadband infrastructure at speeds of 25, 30 megabytes per second to a greater share of residents in the Black rural South than in other regions across the US. So there are a host of issues that have led to the affordability and availability of broadband services in the Black rural South, and that region must get the same amount of attention as urban communities who lack broadband services as well.
Yeah, we took a look at your report because the study that we're doing, Dominique, just so you know, I'm so happy to see my sisters at all the places I used to work. I mean, I am not that old. I just wanted to be clear. But we took a look at your brief because part of what we are trying to do in our research is to also debunk why it's so necessary. What are the utilities of broadband service when people are actually living in the Mississippi Delta or, you know, in places where they're actually battling between, you know, clean water and access to broadband or lack of transportation. And Dr. Triple, just to stay on this for a moment, I remember when I came down to Marion, you told me, right, a lot of people at that time were leaving the school, like, for example, simply because they needed to get jobs in closer and in more populated areas like Selma and other places. I mean, are we going to see, without the access to broadband, more of this sort of migration out of our home communities, where we should be investing in those ecosystems? So Fallon, get ready for your question when it comes to the Black rural South.
First of all, I don't think a lot of times people even equate the necessity or the importance of connectivity to what happens in our communities. So when we see people migrating and we see people leaving, we think, oh, well, of course they're going for other jobs, but part of it is because of the rurality of what they're living in. The idea that we do not have. When I get ready to, you know, when the pandemic itself came about, as I said, it exposed those inequalities, because when everybody else could not go into the doctor's office, they had access to teledoc, they had access to telemedicine, but rural America did not. When families could connect or stay connected to their family members wherever they were via FaceTime, rural America and rural Alabama could not. When people could sit at the meeting table via Zoom around America, rural America and rural Alabama could not. So until the federal government steps in and make internet access available to all, then these inequalities will not only continue to exist, but they will be paramount on a larger scale in so many other areas of life. What we see happening in it's almost like going back to the civil rights era and prior to, when people were migrating from the South and going up north and they were looking for better jobs. Now we're having the same thing that happened, but for different reasons.
And can I also add really quickly is that when we were able to go back home to work, many folks who had traveled from the South and perhaps lived in the North or, you know, whatever part of the region and went back home to work with families now encounter the same issues that, you know, folks who had stayed in the South are experiencing now. So they were working from home, so they weren't able to access broadband as at the best quality as they did in the kind of other parts of the region that they were living. And so it just goes to show you, if those kind of utilities and opportunities and resources are available in rural spaces, then people can stay because they're able to work, live, earn in a community that provides all the necessities to be able to do all of those things.
Well, and that's the thing. And Dr. Wilson, you want to jump in too before we leave this trail of thought?
A side note, these churches are not only helping with the internet, but they're vaccinating people too. Our churches and our faith communities are doing a lot of great work for us right now without having consistent access to the internet. They have figured out hybrid ways to make this work between patching together flip phones to Zoom, back all the way to a hotspot, back to home broadband. I think that is a study in of itself to figure out the pathways in which Black rural Southerners have figured out how to make this work when we denied them access. I was going to talk more about the work in Nashville in particular, because you know, I wear many hats. And so we just produced our first citywide assessment of digital inclusion and access, and it's going to be making its rounds in the press soon. And we have some amazing findings there to say that even in urban environments, it's not so much, once again, access, it is the adoption and affordability issue that is glaring its head. In our zip codes, where we have the highest level of poverty and the highest level concentrations of African-American people, 37209 in Nashville and Davidson County, they are not connected. And so I have a story. I have mentees there. And I said, you know, I'm a big fan of Comcast Internet Essentials. I'm a big fan of all of our providers, amazing low-cost options. But in particular, IE is really big in Nashville. And they said, Miss Fallon, you know we can't go to school when we don't have the internet. So I said, oh, great. Well, let me get on the call. Let me stay on this call for an hour or two to get Comcast Internet Essentials connected at your home, right? And so I went about my way. The pandemic roared on, correct? And I called my mentee, and they're like 15 and 16. I said, so how is remote school going? What do you mean by remote school, Dr. Wilson? I said, is the internet not working? Do I need to call? You know, because I know people in high places and Comcast, I got you. It's like, we don't know how to connect the modem. We don't know how to do it. And y'all, you have to understand, I do a lot of community work. So I should have thought this, but I didn't, because in the midst of trying to make sure we were doing a citywide study, making sure people have what they need, I didn't think that my own mentees that they did. So for 2 months, it sat in a box in the corner of their home. For 2 months, they experienced learning loss. For 2 months, they did not have access, not because it wasn't available, they didn't know how to connect it. And so I think, and what our study shows is that, but the adoption issue, people need to understand the value proposition of it. And it's not because I know Joint Center, and y'all do great work over there about workforce development skills. It is not just about the punitive nature of, you gotta be ready for this new automated world that's coming. I've sold that to people and people don't drink the water of it, right? And so you have to figure out what does recruitment and advertising dollars look like, FCC, towards this moment of really, if it becomes permanent, we need a whole better rollout on this moment. We need recruitment dollars, we need more adoption dollars, so that both rural and urban Black communities can have a level playing field for this new world that's being built. And I'll be honest, the new world is about data, it is about connections, it is about internet, and trying to figure out how to get our communities there when we have to fight just for broadband access is ridiculous to me. And it also said something very significant about how they see Black people in this country, that we are not valuable enough to have access when our lives are on the line because of a pandemic. And now you're sending our children back in the South into schools that are not that. It is I want to put on my little conspiracy hat a little bit and say that there's an agenda here that is not beneficial for our community, but it can be remedied if we had access to the internet.
Yeah, no, I so agree. In my book, I call it America's, failure to adopt the social contract, the digital social contract, right? Because that has a lot to do with whether or not, folks of color are going to be on the right side of history when it comes to technological adoption and utilization. When we think about this, ladies, though, I do want to sort of ask a couple more questions. I think Fallon sort of represented this fact that, there's one side of this is the consumption of technology that we've been speaking about. What can people do with it? Healthcare, education, that kind of stuff. But then there's this other part, and I wrote about this in my Tech New Deal. And I know that other groups like the National Urban League are looking at it, the Lewis Latimer Plan, which is around workforce. How do we get people to also take advantage potentially of these new jobs? I mean, if tech is a new infrastructure, then that means that somebody's going to have to build it. First, I'll go to you, Dr. Trimble, and then I'll go to Dominique. On the education side, what do we need to start doing to make sure that our babies, our pipeline are actually developed? And you're an educator. What needs to happen so that our young people see that it's not about having a phone so that you can get on Fortnite, but it's also about being able to develop that phone, the code behind it, or it may be able, be related to being able to provide that broadband access for the hotspot by climbing up on poles. And those are really good jobs. They're union jobs. So I want to talk to you both about what are we going to need to do to educate our pipeline that this exists. And then Dominique, I'm going to ask you a similar question around workforce. Starting with you, Dr. Trimble.
As I live in rural Alabama, and then the northern part of the state is Huntsville. Okay. And Huntsville has NASA. Huntsville now has several high schools that's technological high schools. That is like a difference in night and day. So when we have those conversations with our students about it, we've provided coding. We're starting to try to provide an avenue for those students to have aspects of those jobs, to be able to go into those areas and those careers when they go to college. It's like telling them, you can go into Chinese. You can become the director of a Mandarin Chinese school. It is totally out of their realm of thinking, because it is not at their fingertips, because they don't feel it, because they don't see it. They don't think that it exists. Yes, those opportunities are out there. Those are the jobs of the future. Those are the jobs right now. So when we have those conversations and we try to help to build the students to move into those areas and those careers, it's hard to do when it does not exist in our areas. When I do not have access to the internet, and it goes back to what Dr. Wilson said, their hotspots, whatever they had, sat in the box for so long, because we just assume they know these things. They don't know, because this is nothing that they've had access to. And as a result of that, we are limited, they are limited, and we can try to encourage them to do something that until they can actually see it and experience it themselves, then it's like foreign language to them. And that is unfortunate. So what happens is we stay behind. We talk about a level playing field. There's no level playing field. We don't even have the uniforms to even get in the game, to even sit on the bench at this point in time. We're still back in almost like sweeping the floors in the locker room. We're not even out there as players as of yet, because they do not have access to what everyone else have access to. They're not even on the road to even being able to see it. The vision is not there. And the vision is not there is because they cannot even see it with their physical eyes.
Whew, look, don't get me started, okay? And I know we're limited for time, but let's go down this pathway, because a child cannot be or become what they want if they don't see it. And I think that's so important for us to actually start talking to our young people about this. But we come back to that, because I know there's a lot of content at RPC, and I don't want to get nobody mad, because it might be another panel discussion. But you're right on point as an educator that we need to start focusing on this. Dominique, what about the jobs? The fact of the matter is, there is going to be a substantial amount of money in infrastructure, and broadband infrastructure in particular, in addition to roads, bridges, and other water and electricity grids. But on the broadband side, we have not seen the type of diversity that we need to see when it comes to not only the jobs, but the apprenticeships or other credentialed roles that people can play. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these are in line with union jobs, people who work in the communication sector. Curious from you on what we need to do, or what messages should we be sending out to the Department of Labor and other places to encourage them to fund these types of opportunities for people of color?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Just a shout out to my new colleague, Dr. Alex Carmadel, who's working on workforce policy issues for Black workers. We also have a prior report on the future of work for Black communities. I think this question is very important, because it is essential to the new infrastructure package. And it's important that we really connect the kind of broadband opportunities to job growth, as well as increase in earnings for Black communities. Some of the research that we have gathered as it relates to the Black rural South is that unemployment, labor force participation, income, and child poverty rates are far worse in the Black rural South than most other parts of the United States. And greater broadband access and adoption in the Black rural South could help increase earnings and reduce unemployment. Research shows that expanding access to broadband provides larger employment gains in rural areas than in metro areas, and moving from no availability to full availability boosts employment in rural areas by 2.24 percentage points. Also, Deloitte just completed some analyses that shows that there's a strong correlation between broadband availability, jobs and GDP growth. Other research shows that an internet subsidy program, like the Internet Essentials program, can increase earning averages of low-income families by 5.3%. So that shows that there's a connection, and we need to have a much more broader and intentional conversation about labor force participation, job opportunities, apprenticeship programs, and how it connects to the broadband conversation. I'll also say that online training through the access of broadband services can facilitate skill building that leads to advances in earnings and careers. The National Coalition and their study have found that Black workers comprise 12% of overall workers, but represent 15% of the subset of workers who have no digital skills and 21% of those with limited skills. So there's clearly a connection, and I think more investment in those kind of job opportunities is essential for connecting more people to the internet.
Oh, I so agree. As part of my Tech New Deal, I talk about the fact that we need to find ways to credential these roles, make them apprenticeships. We need to find ways to actually inventory them so we know and we can raise awareness among communities of color that these jobs actually exist. And you know what else I put out there, Dominique, is along the same lines. If people can't see themselves in it from the start, we need to have a digital service corps. I love the way Fallon mentioned that we had people who needed folks to come with the laptop to sign them up for the vaccination or the COVID test. Where's the digital service corps? It's as necessary as a medical service corps when it comes to really investing in the technology in your community. I lived in Chicago for a very long time, and that was a lot of what I did was working with community members to make sure that we left within the community technology. But Fallon, as we're on this conversation of the other benefits of broadband access and how we should create digital equity, it is also important for startups. I mean, look, going online means that there's a Black version of DoorDash. Going online means that there's going to be a Black-owned version or a Black idea created around, ride-sharing services. How do we begin to look at where diverse founders fall into this, particularly those in the tech space? And what would you say coming out of this pandemic we need to be paying attention to? Because I know you and I shared a spot along with Dominique on the Federal Communications Commission advisory group that really delved into ways to close the divide among diverse founders.
I think my response to you is probably be the response I wanted to give to what Dominique and Dr. Tribble has shared. I think we have all the data that lets us know that having the skill sets for this new tech world is essential. We also know that many of our companies are looking to hire based on those skill sets. But we also know, once again, that white supremacy and racism and implicit and explicit bias are stagnating, right? I guess my response to that, and also to this notion of supporting Black tech startups and scaling Black tech business, is that I think we need to begin building actual models to show that we can build thriving Black tech ecosystems within municipalities that would allow us to have a Black tech future. I have to say this, I know what the data says, and I know what our companies and cities say they need. And I also know the story around there is no capital for Black tech companies. And the story is true, but I think we have to figure out how do we build the model within our Black communities using the resources that we have. I am of the mindset that HBCUs and Black churches, because when you think of institutions, and Dominique, you may have to help me on this because you know the econometrics framing for all of this, places where we have financial possibilities is in our land and is in the institutions and the people that attend those institutions. HBCUs own their lands and they may have endowments. They're little. I mean, let me not say that because I'm with the Spelman, so I know. Shout out Spelman. They have endowments that, we don't talk to fund investors how they invest those funds. They should be investing them into Black tech startups. And so what I'm advocating more so for anything is to build a thriving Black tech ecosystem model in cities that allow us to identify where the emerging Black tech enabled and Black tech companies. Let me tell you, go to any accelerator incubator in a municipality and you ask this question. So could you give us a list of Black tech companies in your cities? Mind you, these entrepreneurship centers are funded by the state and by their counties. And they would be like, I don't know. How don't you know? Oh, because you don't have anyone on staff dedicated to identifying these organizations and these companies because you don't see what they do as valuable, or you are agnostic to race. Either way, it's a problem. And so for me, when I think about this new world and how it intersects with like broadband, you can't have future tech companies if our family members don't have access to begin to ideate and create and think about not just being consumers of technology, but building the tech to do it. I think about all the amazing Black young folks on TikTok. I wish I was young like that to be on there, but I'm not, because I don't want China, taking my data. It's a whole thing there for me. But if they could actually build the tech that allows them to do their dances, right, that become viral sensations, then we have like an economic like leapfrog into like generational wealth. But I am of the mindset, now this is not MMTC talking, let me just say this, because this is not MMTC, this is Fallon's personal belief. I think we are what we have always been waiting for. Yes, we don't have the tech skills. Yes, we don't have laptops. Yeah, we ain't got broadband, but the creative imagination of Black people to survive in a country that wanted us to be dead and silent is a type of energy that makes computers run. Is 0// bracket, which is energy. And if we can take that same energy to build our own Black tech meccas in cities and rely on our own resource to do so. And so in my other hat that I wear as a co-founder of Black Tech Futures Research Institute, we experiment with that model. And we're working in 4 southern cities: Nashville, Birmingham, Memphis. Houston is a southeast city, but you get the point. And we're experimenting with data and models on how to do it on the ground, because at the end of the day, I can't trust any one company or organization to save Black people. I think our onus is on ourselves to figure out these models and to take all the data that the Joint Center and the Brookings Institute have done and put them into action. And to have some, what Black people don't get in this country, this is back to your point, Dr. Tribble, we don't get to play with technology. We don't get the vision. We don't get the dream. I mean, the amount of white startups that have like burned through millions of dollars with no clients, no proof of concept, no market. We don't get that. And so I can't look to them anymore. And I know all the work we've done with the, because the, what is it? And Dominique is a part of this. CBC, Congressional Black Caucus. I know that Tech 2025 is going to be focused, a part of it is going to be focused on tech entrepreneurship, which I really like. But if I had to say anything that came from the work that we did on our FCC panel, I need us to support Black tech entrepreneurship support organizations. Why? Because when Black folks are turned away from accelerators and incubators in their cities, when, especially in the South, because most venture is on the West or East Coast and not in the South, right? We need those Black organizations to say, I'm going to figure out how to fundraise for your first seed round for family and friends. We're going to do crowdfunding like Black Girl Venture. We need to put like federal funding around those organizations so they can navigate this space locally for Black tech founders. And then they end up doing it for Black technologists, and then do it for Black tech STEAM people, K through 12. They become, and one day I'm gonna fully write about this. Nicole be telling me to write, Dominique. But they become like aggregators, and they become like where the mayors go to say, oh, you did this for tech entrepreneurship. Can you talk about digital inclusion now? Can you talk about STEAM? Can you talk about post-secondary and HBC? They become all things, in some ways detrimental, because they don't think about Black folks' mental health when they access all this free work and they don't pay us. But they become cornerstones within cities. And so we just need for the federal level to canonize them as, in the ways that we canonize libraries and all these other places as places for tech innovation in this country. And the National Science Foundation can chime in, the SBA can chime in, and the FCC can make this thing work for us.
So in other words, she was calling names. Fallon, look.
Drops the mic.
I have a lot of
who y'all are.
Did I tell you she's a church lady? She's an evangelist around this stuff. I thought I was an evangelist. She is definitely an evangelist on this stuff. Y'all better reach her, see her, and know her at RPC.
Dr. Renita J. Weems. I better have some evangelism on my life.
Yo, God, no, definitely. But, Dominique, as we begin to wrap up this conversation, I want to go to, Dr. Wilson really talked about the blind spots that we have when it comes to, switching the question from where are the challenges and the needs to where are the opportunities. How do we make the glass half full versus half empty? How do we look at Black communities as not deficits, but assets? And obviously assets exist when we start to look at tech entrepreneurship support organizations and what they need to actually be successful in an area that does not give them capital. Just a shout out, Rainbow Push Coalition's Silicon Valley project is very much focused on that going forward. Dominique, what about from the federal perspective? What can we expect in terms of creating more opportunities through the proposed infrastructure package, which hopefully will be passed by the time that this session is aired, or even some state efforts that we're actually going to see that are going to invest in broadband and digital equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're right in the midst of a bipartisan conversation about the infrastructure package. And so when we think about some of the challenges we've talked about today as it relates to broadband and to solve some of these specifically for Black and Brown communities, some of the recommendations that we have put forward in our recent issue brief, as Dr. Fallon Wilson just said, we need a permanent and meaningful broadband benefit program. Secondly, I would say that we need internet service providers that receive federal funding for broadband to have low cost options for low income households, right? So that they can afford broadband services. We need robust, accurate, disaggregated data about broadband across the US to really understand what communities need the most help to inform the kind of policy making and funding that will go to specific communities. We also need rules to prevent digital redlining. That is when ISPs choose to build infrastructure in higher wealth, wider communities. We need to prevent that. We also need to prohibit state governments from inhibiting local broadband networks. Sometimes we found out that data has shown that, again, Black communities only have one internet service provider option, and we need more to be able to have lower costs for folks. And lastly, I say we need to increase federal coordination of federal broadband programs so that we're all working together, right, and understanding where the problem is, where the funding needs to go, and the specific kind of services that are needed to connect more Black and Brown communities to broadband services.
Yeah, no, I think that those are really some good points. I mean, now I'm going to tell you though, it's very challenged though to build a local municipal network. I'm just going to put that out there. Haven't been somebody, and again, now I'm really going to date myself, who was around when the city of Chicago was actually trying to do local. Don't you look at me that way, but I was at the table when.
Speak the truth, Nicole, because I work municipalities too.
I did, and it's very hard. I mean, it's very hard because of the fact that you have to have the government as an anchor institution. But at the end of the day, when you're doing a locally owned municipal network, and people who know me know that I've always spoke this way, you've got to make sure that you have it in a way where the city can also be accountable to the service. I do believe in competition, though, and I do believe that we have to have a conversation where there are places that people do not want to serve. It's a community of 800 people, 500
Right.
people, 1,000 people, that we need to make that happen and maybe look at nonprofit collaboratives or other collaboratives to make it work. So I do agree that government has to step in, and it has to be at the federal and state level, folks, and it has to also be at a city council level. Which Dr. Trimble, it brings me to this, final question as we begin to wrap up, and then I'll let you all fire hose anything that you wanted to say. If we don't solve this, I mean, seriously, we don't solve this, what's at stake for the Black community? What's at stake when you wake up every day? She's a rock star. She's been on PBS, A&E, talking and sharing her plight. Superintendent of Alabama School District knew her, highlighted her, and then she retired. Because guess what? We get tired of this work. But Dr. Trimble, what would you say if we don't really take this on? What is going to be the potential impact on Black and Brown communities going forward?
The plight, I think about from a civil rights perspective, where our people were into where they are now. I can only imagine what it was like when our forefathers felt and how they felt when they went from kerosene lights to electricity, when they went from drawing water from a well to being able to just turn a knob and water's right at their hand. I can only think about when they went from riding in a horse and buggy to turning
Right.
stilts and being able to ride down the road. When our children of color can sit down at any time and have the world at their fingertips, they're already doing some amazing things, I should say. But at that time, it will be like, man, look out world, here they come. See, because availability leads to employability. And a lot of times people think Black people are just lazy. We're not lazy. When you give us the tools, not only will we do, but we will outdo. So
Right.
availability not only leads to employability, but it also leads to probability, which in turn leads to hope. And that's what we're looking for. Hope for our children to be able to excel, for them to be able to apply. Like I said, once you get the tools in their hand, baby, here we come. So yes, we are on our way. Just give us the tools. You ladies keep working. Give it to us. Put them in the hands of my babies, and you will see what they will do.
Whew. Well, listen, for people who don't know Murren, Alabama, first of all, she in my book, as long as this beautiful community and the work that they've done. But I'm going to tell you, you don't know Murren, Alabama, you don't know the history in terms of how it was instigated for the Selma marches. You got to go back and really look that up. Because I think at the end of the day, that birthplace, that place, probably the Reverend Jackson has visited as well. I know Bishop Jakes was born there. A lot of really great people born in Murren, Alabama. I never been. I'm a city girl. I was born in Queens. So it took me a minute to get there. It took about 2 hours to get there. But I learned so much from this young lady just about why we need to do the work that we're doing. Listen, Rainbow Push Coalition, if you haven't got the spirit, I have. This is important work when we talk about digital equity. And as you go through the remainder of this conference, I think it's important that you take the conversation that has come from 3 Black women and think about what that means going forward. As we've suggested, you got emergency broadband benefit that is actually needs to be more permanent, as Fallon has said. Fallon, what's the name of your initiative so people can join on?
It's Black Churches for Broadband, but can I say one quick thing?
Oh, you
I'm
sure
sorry.
can. Go ahead. No, it's okay.
I just wanted to say, listening to you, Dr. Tribble, is your spoke to my heart.
Right?
Spoke to my heart. And it also made me think about people like, how do we do models? How do we build a future? Oh, Black people this. It makes me always think of Freedom Summer. And it makes me think of what happened in Freedom Summer, right? They understood that to break Jim Crow, not only did they have to understand their voting rights, but they had to read. And so when they took all of these amazing young people down into Mississippi, into the Delta, they taught them how to read. They made transgenerational learning environments. So your mama who couldn't read was there sitting with her 5-year-old who was trying to read. It makes me think that we need that type of model to really build an equitable future moving forward. And also the other piece, because I'm gonna push back on my liberal folks, I'm about to get my conservatives, I'm gonna say it, and this is Fallon's opinion and not MMTC's. We're so focused on, sometimes we can be overly focused on the good. I mean, what is the good, right? That we ignore the people underneath it all. We don't look at how they live their lives and their experiences. And so one of my things that I push back on public interest tech focus, we talk about data bias, but y'all don't talk about access to broadband. Only recently have you started this, right? And so because we gotta have competition, but people can't eat. Are you feeding them too? Because they can't get access to the internet, so they don't know where the food pantries are. I think we all have a lot of humility in DC that we need to begin thinking about. And so that we can have the spirit of a Dr. Tribble when we do this work, because I think it will take that level of spirit and in historical models, because we're a historical society, to really push forward. It is the same Copa thing. It is amazing how our cultural traditions even come into technology. To go forward, we must go back. And I think some of the models that we did in the civil rights movement and other movements for like liberation can be re-operationalized to really push for a Black tech future, because that's what we want. Yeah. But I'm done. I just thank you, Dr. Tribble, for that.
Oh no, she brings so much to you. Listen, folks, I was trying to close this panel, but if you all want to keep talking, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that and still get on to the programming that is regularly scheduled for Reverend Jackson and his team. But I would say this, Val, to your comments, that this conversation that we're having represents tiers of people who are actually working in this space. If you don't know them, get to know them. Dominique, what's your Twitter handle and where can people find you again?
You can find me at jointcenter.org. That's our website, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And I'm also on Twitter at techpolicy, the number 4, and then the letter POC.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Trimble, are you on Twitter yet?
I've been on Twitter, Nicole. I mean, we trying to do age me here? Or trying to act like I wasn't back.
Dr. Trimble.
That wasn't me. I'm on Twitter.
I know you. I'm look. She talking about Snapchat and TikTok. I'm just on Twitter. And how can they find you, Dr. Trimble?
I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram at ctrim41522.
Thank you. And Dr. Fallon, I know you on this. Sister Soldier, which one is yours?
Oh, at Sister Wilson. Sister, SISTAH Wilson. Follow me. You can follow at MMTC as well. But if you want to hear all of Dr. I'm joking. Thank you, Nicole. Come on, Nicole, wrap this up.
Yeah, but you can find me at Dr. Turner Lee and also at the joints at the joints in my old job at Brookings Institution, my new job. I'm going to put myself back on such a nostalgic time. But you can find me at the Brookings Institution, but on Twitter. But also, like I said, I have a new book coming out. Hopefully, I'll be back in Rainbow Push to actually share what I've actually learned. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time to actually come and listen to this panel. And I also appreciate all the wonderful sisters that are doing the great work in this space. Thank you. And thank you, Reverend Jackson, for always entrusting us in your stewardship towards the civil rights.